Begin. Good evening, everybody. It's great to see you all here. And we are delighted to be talking to the Diksha Mohanty today, who's a JGLS alum and currently pursuing her doctorate at University of Oxford in the UK. And special thanks to all the attendees for joining us on this third part of our ongoing doctoral studies series organized by the Office of Alumni Relations, just to have conversations with our alumni about their diverse doctoral experiences, starting a couple of days ago with why do you study at the doctoral level? Why do you get into something like that? To yesterday, talking about getting the application process, acing the application process. Today, we are going to talk to the Diksha about the very phase that she is going through in her doctoral program, which is the early part, how you formulate your research project, and what this initial phase of the entire journey is really all about. So thanks so much, Diksha. Delighted to have you here today. And let's start the conversation with maybe you telling us, yesterday we talked about the application process. And so far we've had a few questions about how different is the doctoral process in different parts of the world, and what do you expect at the application stage, right? And since you are the first kind of international doctoral candidate that we're talking to in this series, maybe you could say something specifically about your application to the University of Oxford and what that was like, which maybe could present a different, a contrasting version of what our previous speakers have talked about. So over to you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I would love to talk about that. Okay, so before that, little background into my own situation. I did not apply to the PhD directly. I did a one-year research degree called the MPhil, and then I transitioned on to the DPhil from that. So what happens is, and I only speak about University of Oxford applications. One of the first things which I did very early on, from my LLM stage actually, was that I knew that this is the path I want to go ahead with research. The first thing I did was to obviously reach out to potential supervisors in the colleges and the schools that I thought I'd be a good fit. I then back then applied to the LSE, to Cambridge, and to Oxford. This is a stage where you're sort of exploring the idea. You don't really have your research questions in hand. You just have a research themes and aims, and you're like Google faculty email IDs and be like, oh, hello, would you be interested in supervising me in this area? It's something I've followed you and your work. I got a couple of faculty members who were excited to supervise me because it pertained to their area. And in Oxford, it worked out particularly fine. I was working, back then I reached out to Dr. Sandy Fredman. She runs the human rights. She's one of the important human rights academics here. So this happened, moving on to once I got the permission that yes, there is a vacancy in terms of interest, in terms of Oxford wanting to take me on, I started the process of actually writing my proposal. Now, Oxford has a very curious requirement of only 600 words for their proposal, which is not a lot of words to convey why you're a good fit, why your topic should be selected, and why you think you can contribute to scholarship with that topic. But it also, I think they test you with those 600 words because they want you to make the best use of that. So that was an incredibly difficult stage. But I got down to doing a lot of a very vast literature review because the threshold for the MPhil and also the DPhil is to make a substantive addition to the scholarship. And the way Oxford looks at it is that you need to explore and look at the existing literature and then comment on what more do you bring to the table. It's a big ask for somebody who's just setting out their research degree, but it is what it is. Once you clear that threshold, then your proposal's ready. Then the other things that you look at is your references and your CV, of course. Specifically UK, and I'm talking about Oxford, they look at a consistent academic CV. So they don't they don't necessarily want to look at publications as such. They want to know that you're invested in research and you have consistent performance in your grades and stuff like that. So that I feel like is something which kind of worked out for me. And then references. I was lucky to get the references of my supervisor from Cambridge, and I also had general professors to refer me for the degree here, for the program here. So that was my sort of entry into Oxford at the MPhil stage. The DPhil stage, because I'm continuing with the same research project, it was just like a formality which I had to go through. So that was it. So alongside
Fantastic.
this, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Finish what you're saying.
Alongside this, it happens parallelly is your funding applications, because whilst Oxford does do take one application for all funding programs, but there are also other funding possibilities which have a separate application. So I'm currently partly funded by the data trusts and partly funded by the Faculty of Law here. And that just, I was lucky enough to not make an additional application because I just got through with the first one itself. But one of the biggest issues that PhD scholars face while applying for an international program is funding. It's prohibitive to a point where you can't possibly, bind yourself to loans and collaterals and at that level of your studies. And so it's a lot of money. So one of the advice would be to start early, because a lot of the massively funded programs, the applications start in August, whilst college applications start in October. So that's something I'll look into. I'll talk about a little bit more. And somebody had given me this advice when I was applying: you should always follow the money. So if yes, there's a concern about branding and schools and supervisors, but if you see an opportunity where you're being completely funded, go for that before anything else. It takes a huge weight off your mind once you get the money secured before anything else. But yeah.
Sounds like something I would say. But thank you for being tactful and saying somebody. No, it probably wasn't me. I was just joking. But yes, thank you for actually when I just unmuted myself just then, I was going to ask you right about this funding part of the whole game. So I'm glad you already mentioned that. And yes, it was the way you walked us through the entire process was actually really helpful, and also I think gives us a sense of the almost like an ordering of the different criteria that one looks for. Okay, great. So, well, clearly it sounds like you were someone who went into a doctoral situation with not only the experience of the MPhil behind you, but someone who was quite convinced that this is something that they wanted to do and they were ready for, and with eyes wide open in that sense. Um, but are there still, I'm just wondering, are there still any surprises you had now that you're 6 to 8 months into it? Is there something that you learned about this early stages of the journey that you hadn't quite anticipated?
Absolutely. I feel like I was waiting for this moment all my life. Uh, okay, so, I always knew I wanted to do this. I knew since undergrad, since the general days, that I will do a PhD at some level, but it's different once you get here and then, and I also started a PhD in a pandemic that I feel like should be the starting line of my thesis as well. But, so what I'll do is I'll try to answer this question in terms of the academic lessons that I've learned over the course of these a year and 6 months. And then there's the process related issues that have come up, and I have sort of learned how to be better and just overcome that. So one of the first things I've learned, and I would want to share this, is before you start a doctoral degree, you have to have a very clear, very clear idea of your research aims and objectives. And I do not mean this in terms of your research questions that you get to later, but you need to know why you're doing this. Why did you decide to devote 4 years of your life in answering this particular question? And why do you think it's a vital question to begin with. And what is it that you want out of the degree? Um, this clarity helps on my bad days when I have, I sort of miss out the larger picture about why I'm doing what I'm doing. And this sort of brings you back to the relevance of the work that we do and, in research and academics. Um, Also, like at Oxford, as I mentioned, the 600 words is not enough space to convey your intentions. You just talk about it in very like broad terms. That doesn't help in terms of translating to real work later on. So once you got accepted, and that's when the work starts, and then you're left very overwhelmed because you didn't think this would be as daunting a task to, you know, to do this research. Also, because the threshold of contributing to scholarship is that high, so you kind of tend to, I think I'm projecting, but I think I tend to get overwhelmed. And, so this sort of clarity as to your research aims and goals is very, very critical when you begin out. And, the second thing is that at the pre-proposal stage, and also once you start the degree, you have to invest serious time in literature review. And a lot of times, at least in legal research, literature review is seen as this, we don't take it as seriously as like the social sciences do, for example, because then you have to justify your methods, you justify the gap in literature. And we don't have to do that because, at least in my doctoral research work, a lot of our work is dealt with case law, in sort of like research. So it's an easy, people think it's easier for us, but it's really not. The reason why I say this is because a good solid review of the scholarship also helps you understand your claims better. So if tomorrow, you also have to, once you become a research student, you have to always keep defending your thesis and your arguments. If anyone in the middle of the road asks me what you're researching on, and I have to tell them, and they're obviously, they'll be intuitively, inclined to dismiss my claims, and I have to always start telling them why I think it's a good research to go on. But personally, for me, for example, I jump into the writing process way too early, and that I've learned over the time that that's not a healthy thing to do. You have to get up, read as wide and as far as you can, as deep as you can, and at the end of the day, your claims are that better supported because you've done this, both pre-proposal and during the first 8 months. I still go back to literature that I read in like August of my application year instead of what I read yesterday, because it was that good and well done back at that stage. And the third thing which I learned is to present your work to an audience. And Oxford's been very safe for me that way, because there's a dedicated human rights space here, and they do a lot of South Asian research in the human rights field. And I have been very lucky to have people that I could present my work to, not formal conferences, but just like internal team meetings and stuff and like that. If anyone who knows me, my batchmates are here. I was terrified of public speaking, never mooted, debated, class participation grades were a torture. So this was possibly the biggest personal development I've had in the past year and a half, kind of, is I've allowed myself to like be a lot more out there with my research. And it's incredible. You also get good feedback and perspectives that you never thought that you would be, you would get. And that's great. I guess one of the biggest things is that I wish I learned this earlier, but it's okay.
That's very well put. I especially love that you addressed how overwhelming this phase can be. Because I remember my own experience when I started out in Indiana in the fall of 2015, being absolutely kind of not overwhelming in the sense of, of feeling kind of pressure to be time bound or something like that. But first of all, for me, it was a huge change of pace from like working at JGU and having all of these responsibilities and being fully in that professional life mode to like falling back into student life. And this is a consideration that that's also been addressed in the last couple of conversations we've had in this series, right? Specifically on this question of, is it a good idea to just continue on after your master's and your MPhil, etc., or is it a better idea to maybe get some work experience and do it? And one of the things we've kind of established is that while it has both have their pros and cons. I mean, it's certainly like when, the difference between being in professional life and taking a break from that and going back into doctoral work is something to for sure consider. And then the other thing which I want to underline, which you just talked about, which is that it's good to put yourself out there even when you haven't figured it out, right? I guess a lot of people would have the tendency to wait and wait and wait until like it's like well formulated, you know exactly what you're doing, etc. But I guess the point of scholarship at any stage, right? Like, your for example, like currently I'm reviewing book proposals for my publisher, Holgrave Macmillan. And tomorrow, when I submit the next proposal to them for my next book, I will be on the other side as an author, right? So it's this thing where it's an ongoing process, and you're never kind of going to be immune from, you never attain that stage where you're going to be immune from feedback and criticism and constructive engagement of others with your work. I mean, the sooner you isn't it?
Add to that, it's also like the first time I presented at Bonavero Institute of Human Rights, and I was terrified. I think I don't think the word terrified really explains how bad
Captures
I felt.
it.
But I got great feedback, and these are like judges and academics and scholars telling me that this is great work, and you've got this, and that is such a tremendous ego boost that you need, because then suddenly you feel validated. You feel like, what, it seems overwhelming. Yes, there are bad days, but this is the day that you work for. Like, to be known and associated with the kind of research that you do. And I just want to add one more thing. One of my biggest, not really regrets, but I have gone from Jindal to Cambridge to Oxford. So I never really got that career break that people, often my peers here, have like come after considerable years of practice. And they have a tremendously different perspective and work ethic and just outlook towards PhD as opposed to me, who this is like my 8th year of law school, kind of like, or more. But that's how it's been. But I feel like if I could possibly tell myself something, like to give myself advice, I'd probably work in an associated field before coming to the doctoral degree. That's some advice I'll give, because you sort of tend to lose perspective if you're just a student all along, and you need that perspective in your PhD to be reflected in your PhD. Because I was very accustomed to your 9 to 5 lectures and then doing homework and essays sort of an environment, and I just transitioned to a bigger essay and no exams situation. But it's all still the same in my head as it was in Jindal. So if anyone who is considering a doctoral degree and is probably in law school still, I'll always recommend take a break. Be that convinced of your research and your career decisions, and then join back to the PhD.
See, now you're just stealing my thoughts, Natisha. Okay, listen, before I ask you the next question, I want to invite our attendees to please submit their questions for Natiksha using either Q&A or chat. And yeah, we look forward to getting to the Q&A in a couple of minutes. One thing that we'd also maybe like to hear from you is, what is your commitment right now, particularly in terms of coursework? And for those who are thinking about, well, I'm already writing, I've been teaching for a while, or I've done these previous masters, what really would you tell them about the importance of coursework, how it is helping you, whether it is helping you, how it is helping you shape what kind of influence it is having on your shaping of your thinking about your research question, and where do you stand on all of that?
Okay, I'll do that. Okay, so in terms of coursework in Oxford, before you start your legal research, you have to take a mandatory course called the Course of Legal Research Methods. So that's your first term of residence, and there's some more additional hours of research training that you need to do before you can sit for, start a degree officially. And this course particularly has been transformative in terms of its how much I've gained from that course in itself. I'll just talk a little bit more about the course before I talk about the others. So, I haven't, so, for me, for the longest time, I thought research was this very intuitive thing that you read, you learn, you argue, you present, and it's over. But, there's a lot of, backing that goes on to your research design that I did not have insight to prior to starting this degree. And I think that is something which this course particularly opened my eyes to. The other thing that I did is we have to take research electives, and I have taken up advanced doctrinal methods because my work is predominantly doctrinal. And, throughout this course, it's just helped me sort of like appreciate the application of my choices more. For example, now if tomorrow I have to defend, why are you using this method? Why is this your source? Who is your audience? I can do all of this because I'm that well trained to understand what are the implications of different research designs on how, or, why is my claim better made in this way and not through any other way? So this was something which I think I gained a lot from in Oxford itself. So, so how does my course load, my workload actually, I had this elective components until last term. This term I don't have that. So I have to present my research on a weekly basis to my team, my inner research team. Besides that, I have to work full time with One Aware Institute of Human Rights. So currently I'm working with them on this project on civil liberties, civil liabilities for violations in human rights. Very close to my topic, I'll get to that in a bit. But all of this sort of works in together. So my week looks pretty, I'm either researching on my topic or on something else. I know it's all the same or it's completely different. So that's that. I forgot the other question you asked. Something about, I forgot, I completely forgot.
The question was really about, well, okay, so some programs would, and you've partly addressed it, so some programs would require you to do a lot of coursework. Some programs are more flexible on that. So really what we're trying to understand is, to what extent does having to go through all that coursework help if you're at a stage where you've already kind of been writing and publishing or teaching and stuff?
So I think the US schools have a lot more, they have a very rigorous training program prior to actually doing the research. But because ours is a very truncated 3-year PhD compared to the US, it's a lot more flexible in that sense. So I think the assumption is that you start your research already having some semblance of methods and, just background in mind. Which is why for a newbie like me, that is what I struggled with. For example, I'm not trained in, let's say, legal theory or comparative methods to the extent my colleagues are, but I had to do this elective to then be called that, oh, now I know what you mean when you talk about comparative methods. It's not what I thought in my mind. So that is that. But it's not as, it's not that difficult or rigorous as the US schools. I feel like they have it a lot more. I feel like they do first 2 years of training or 1 year of training and then they do research. But yeah.
That's right. And that also a little bit depends on the program. For example, I mean, my coursework was waived, heavily,
Oh, wow.
like almost down to nothing. But it was in consideration of the fact that, of where I was in my kind of academic life. So you're right. On the whole, the US system is known for, the comprehensive exams and all of that. It also depends a little bit on the discipline, I guess. And however, the US system is also the one which is the most flexible, right?
Really?
So yeah, so the UK system and the European system, even though it has a more truncated coursework element, it will not be very easily kind of waived. It will be quite, it will be quite strictly, regardless of where you are, it will be made part of your.
In Oxford, we have a viva at the end of every year, and only if you progress or you pass the viva is when you're allowed to go to the next year, or else you have to go do the first year work again. So that's a little scary, but yeah.
So the questions have started coming in. Pankari asks, what's your research question, Dr. Mohanty? And while Oxford gave you 600 words, we give you 600 characters. So go.
Okay, thank you, Pankari. Okay, so I told this to ma'am the other day that when you ask a PhD student to talk about the question, it can either be very exciting or very scary. So I think it's scary for me right now. But anyway, in very broad terms, my research has to do with the idea of commensurate remedies. So it sort of looks at if there is a violation for Article 21 and the courts give you a remedy, how do we know that that remedy A correlates to the violation and B is the content of the remedy adequate? This is what I started with originally as my MPhil thesis. Then I had to narrow it down to a specific right and remedy. And I looked at torture and compensation in my MPhil. So I looked at if monetary compensation is an adequate remedy in terms of the way it's been constructed by Indian courts. Now, my proposal has evolved into its entirely different monster, and I'm looking at if the way you characterize a claim has any sort of bearing on the content of the remedies. So, for example, if tomorrow, no, I'll just tell you what happens in India. If you were to file a claim in India for torture, but term it as a civil case under negligence, you get a different remedy out of it. And if you were to do writ litigation for it under Article 21, it's a different remedy for that. So which is the better way to do it? And if the answer is that you want a court to give you very prohibitive and very onerous damages and all of that in mind, and really make it impossible for the state to violate rights, which is the way we should go. So that's broadly my research. And I honestly can't explain all of this in 600 characters. So I feel like it's too little. I think Cambridge asked for a 3,000 word proposal, which is nothing. Like I can't even tell you how horrible I felt writing that 600-word proposal. But yeah.
I totally understood everything you just said, Tanisha.
It's interesting.
Next, swiftly moving on to the next question, which is from Nirmal and which you partly already addressed. Would working in the field area of interest before jumping into a PhD help in any way insofar as helping one to get some clarity about the objectives one wishes to fulfill? So, do you have anything to add on that?
It's absolutely. I mean, absolutely. There's a lot of my friends who are doing the DPhil right now. They have come after years of experience, either as practicing barristers, even judges. Our friend who's a judge, um, and I can't match their level of confidence and just knowledge that they have uh, with their area as opposed to mine, which is my experience has been mostly academic, and it just sort of I feel I would have done better if I came back with some experience in the field that I'm working in. It's also different in terms of the way I look at my research. It came up in my MPhil Viva. They asked me, "Your theory is excellent, but will it work in practice?" Now, I don't have experience of the practice to tell you one way or the other. And because we work with law and our audiences, judges, and all of that, I believe if you're considering a legal PhD, a law PhD, then you should have some practice or some experience in the field that you're working in. Yeah.
I mean, I would just add to that, and I'm completely with you here, Tatisha. I would just add to that it's also about a certain kind of personal growth that comes with experience, which really helps as you evolve and move through your doctoral journey. For example, if I were to talk about myself, I mean, after doing my residency at Indiana in 2015, I came back and I fell back into work, and then a lot happened. And in 2019, I published my first book. And then when the lockdown started in 2020, I was like, okay, I've finally run out of excuses to like put off my doctoral work. So let me just sit and write it. And I realized that I was still working on the exact same question I had decided on in 2015, but I had completely changed as a person, right? Like I was a different person. And having done the book and toured with it and had all that experience in the interim 4 years, even though much of it had maybe nothing to do with my doctorate, it was just really a boost of confidence and it gave me a certain clarity in terms of what it is I wanted to deliver with what I'm doing, right? And where does this fit in the scheme of things? Which is a kind of clarity that you can't expect to have at the very initial stages, which is where that feeling of being lost comes from. right? And that tendency to kind of second guess comes from. So much of it is also, it's just about the life experience, I guess, that's picked up also along the way, which I would strongly
That is true. That is
recommend.
true.
Thanks, Nirmal, for that question. There's another question from Ashawari, who asks, how difficult is it to write that research proposal? How much time should I dedicate towards this with my teaching allocation or otherwise? What do they look for? So on one hand, this question is about research proposal, and maybe now that you are coming close to your proposal defense, maybe you can talk about that aspect of it. And then the other part of this question, which I will also kind of maybe rephrase a little bit, is, during your doctoral program, like you mentioned that you have a lot of other research commitments, right? What is your experience which you would like to highlight in terms of how those other commitments feed into your doctoral work, right? Because some people feel really torn about this. They're like, okay, I have this all this other workload, which I don't know what to do with that and what I can get with that. And it's almost competing with my focus on my doctoral project. So what do you have to say on that?
So thank you so much for that question, Ashravi. So I will. So when you're reaching out to professors for potential supervision, you approach them with a tentative proposal in mind. So one thing that they can do is they will help you if they agree to supervise you. They can also help you sort of, direct you and guide you as to which way proposal should go in order to then land a place at the college that you're applying to. The other thing that you do, so yeah, so what I meant to say that is the writing of the initial research proposal isn't as daunting as it might appear, because they're not looking for a very finalized perfect product at that level. They're just looking at how capable you are of original thought and how much of a clear vision you have of your aim. The aim is not the question itself. The aim is what you intend to do with that research, or which way do you think this will develop. And I think that's very comforting to know that they're not looking at a very polished, finished research aim and proposal at that stage. Just enough to keep the conversation going. It sort of helps if your research is not sort of like piques the interest. So I'm talking about something new, which, I'll tell you about my field. Human rights is a very saturated area. There's a lot of voices, a lot of Indian voices, lots of scholars are here. We're doing like, oh, you're doing Article 14, oh, I'm doing 19. Like that sort of a conversation. To then find your space, that is where the tricky part comes in. And so you need to look at how does my research sort of help solve a very real world problem? And if you can make that reality reflect in your proposal, you get that much of a advantage with applications. So yeah, it's not very difficult, not very daunting. The earlier you do it, the more chances you have of getting guidance from a future supervisor. They don't expect a finished product, and it's more of making your research seem relevant in the current time. So yeah, that's it.
While we're still on the question of the proposal, I want to pick this up, which is about this one up from Vijay, which is about literature review. And I think I get where they're coming from. This is a question about how much time should one devote on literature review before we start putting your, you start formulating your research proposal or draft or your question, right? Because it's quite possible to just keep getting lost and finding more and more and more and going further and further away because you've lost confidence that there's anything to be added to this conversation.
That is true. Honestly, I would love for somebody else to give me an answer to this, because I am at that stage right now where I feel like what I'm saying is the most basic intuitive statement anyone has ever made in the history of statements. I feel like that on a daily basis, but on a very uh, serious note. So literature review is essentially doing two things. One is you're poking holes in other people's theories. So you're telling them, oh, I don't think you did a good job at defending what you're doing. I'll do that for you. That's one way of looking at it. And second thing is for you to tell the admission staff or your reviewer, whoever it is, that you are bringing something new to the table. Now, I don't think you can ever claim absolute novelty, although that is a standard for passing the DPhil here, absolute novelty of idea, which is very scary. But I guess you read enough, you cover you read far and wide so as to cover the most obvious places that you're looking at. So it shouldn't be a case where you missed a very obvious link or perspective or scholarship that would have directly answered your claim, and you did not do that. So just a short detour. My MPhil Viva had a lot of that. So they were like, "Oh, did you look at this so and so's work in Colombia?" Because what I'm doing dealt with the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And for me to then be like, oh, wait, yes, I have. I read their work, and I don't think that fits what I'm saying for so and so reasons. So they expect you to have that kind of confidence to have read stuff which should be on your radar. Uh, and I feel like, I don't know, I'll speak about my experience again. Once you start reading articles, you'll see that everyone comes somewhere in the same sort of citations follow. Like you have a general idea of who's speaking which, what are they speaking to and who is their audience, all of that. And at that level where you can read all the footnotes and you sort of have an idea of where they came from, you're in a good spot, because that means you've done a lot of your basic ground reading very, very well. So now, for example, I'm currently thinking about doing comparative work, and I'm looking at New Zealand and UK, Canada, US. But every time I look at the footnotes and I've come across those names properly, and I was like, yeah, I know where you're getting at, and I know I've reviewed these already, and I know I'm on the stage to tell you something new about this. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think if it helps, it's important to understand that even though like you're encouraged to envision the whole doctoral journey in these phases, the literature review is not done and dusted.
Yeah, totally.
It's just not something that you get out of the way and you move on to other things, right? So that is one thing that I would say, that maybe when you read something like at your proposal stage, and you read the same thing again when you were writing up your final your thesis, and you read it in two different ways,
Yeah.
right? That's quite possible. So the first thing is like not to unduly put yourself under pressure. This is going to be the one time, literature review, and it's going to be perfect, and then you're going to move on. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is also to, to also hone in on your own approach, right? Like, what sort of a thinker are you? What is it that you're doing? Are you doing critical reading of a particular school? Are you applying a specific theoretical perspective to an existing body of literature? Are you doing more kind of lateral connecting the dots sort of thinking, and that's how you're finding your kind of niche? So it's a little bit important to understand what you're good at, and run with that, because otherwise you're just reading a bunch of literature and you're not sure how to process it, right? So it's important to have that frame in your mind as to like, this is the frame, this is kind of almost like the machine through which I'm running this whole thing to see what comes out at the other side, right?
Can I add to that? I was not very confident and familiar with private law, just not being my area, but a whole chunk of my MPhil thesis happened to deal with private law, in the sense that I need to go back and read this hardcore contract law and tort law theory, which I've never been exposed to before. And I remember feeling so lost, and I used to cry every day, like, what is this? What am I doing? But what helped is once I got a clarity on the perspective I was approaching the subjects with, and once I got that locked in, then it became a lot more easier, because I'm critiquing, I'm looking from this one lens, which makes it easier. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm gonna sort of combine two questions, which anyway are linked because they are all about the whole motivation and discipline kind of aspect of it. So, how do you keep yourself calm and focused? It's so easy to get lost in research and lose motivation. And then the other question is, since you have to decide your own schedule, you have to be very kind of self-driven. how have you maintained discipline, especially considering the pandemic? Do you have any suggestions?
I so I guess one way to look at this is, it is a lonely task to do a research degree. Often you're just left on your own with your thoughts, and we don't have deliverables on a day-to-day basis, so it's easy to feel like lack of schedule can get very overwhelming. I'll give you that. It's one way my supervisor tells me to do this is to treat it like a full-time job. So at 9 a.m. you're on your desk, and at 5 p.m. you log out, and then you can go live your own life and do your hobbies and other stuff that you have to do. But from 9 to 5 it's pure research, pure working, just as you would in a firm or any other sort of place of work. And I think that brings some semblance of structure to my day, because the minute I start thinking of it as a job, I am also more responsible. I don't take it for granted that I have this block of time in the day where I will just do my research and nothing else. That helps. And it's about, I'm not as calm as focused as I appear to be. I rely heavily on my friends and family to get me through this. It's not been easy, but at the end of the day, I would not be doing anything else. So that helps me to like get up the next day and start working again. So that's it.
Yeah, that's great. And it's wonderful that you actually acknowledge that, right? That there are these ups and downs. It's not a straight line from beginning to end, for sure. Um, if it helps, again, this is why we are almost also having these conversations, because a doctoral journey is a life experience, right? And again, we pretty much arrived at the same conclusion yesterday also, that it's not the next step of getting qualified or continuing your education, and it's certainly not about completing your education, right? It's not starting from where you left off your undergraduate and your master's and continuing on in the same vein. It's something else altogether. It's being put to a test of not just your kind of academic accomplishments, but whether you as kind of an individual have attained that mastery over a discipline, a mindset, a profession, right? And so it's a test of all of those things, and coming out on the other side, is I guess at times baffling and surprising, but you will feel transformed as a person, right? And that's one of the reasons why it's worth it, I guess, if not any other. This has been so good with Diksha. And of course, all the other alumni also kind of jumping in on this today. We've just learned so much, and we're excited for you, and we're wishing you the best. Couldn't be more proud. Keep us posted, and thank you again to the attendees for your active participation. Do join us again tomorrow as the series continues with a conversation with Professor Manveen Singh. And tomorrow we'll be talking about the next kind of important aspect of doctoral work, which is method and mentorship. So I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you, Diksha. Have a lovely day ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.